A network of how many chemicals called travel through the goes looking for on why exactly. What are the two major classifications of hormones? Steroids and non-steroids. Do you know the third? The minor class? Yeah, we say eicosanoids usually, but you got it. Yeah, it's spelled E-I-C. It's a weird spelling. The eicosanoids. We'll get to those a little bit later. Do you happen to know what the two eicosanoids are? Anyone in your reading? Yeah, that's okay. So here's what we're going to do to start with this evening. Oh, yes, Josh. Did you say leukotrienes? Yeah. And prostaglandins are the other ones. We'll talk about those a little bit later. What I'm going to do right now, we've already talked about how steroids work last week on our lecture class. Now we're going to talk about how non-steroids work. Non-steroids. These are hormones that are based on what kind of molecules? Amino acids / proteins. Right, exactly. This is a non-steroid mechanism. Sometimes it's referred to as the second messenger system or mechanism. First things first. Hormones traveling through what body fluid? Blood. How does it get out of the blood? Capillaries. Capillaries, simple squamous epithelium. It can diffuse out of the capillary. It goes to the tissues. The tissues have receptors on the cells that we'll call target cells. However, not however. So there's receptors on target cells, right? So the hormone comes in and binds to the receptor on the surface of the cell. You see it right there. So if you knew nothing else, if you see the hormone binding out here, you know it's a non-steroid. Can you tell me why? Because steroids diffuse through the membrane and bind on the inside, right? So this is the first difference right here. The hormone binds to the receptor on the surface. When the non-steroid hormone binds to this receptor, it changes the shape of a receptor. That's how so much works in the body. You know, the way that we turn things on and turn things off on a molecular level is by either adding things to them or changing their shape. So much tends to be based on shape in the human body, especially on a molecular level, on a small level like this. When the shape changes, there's also something else that occurs at the same time. You see this molecule right here? I don't know if you can see it from where you are, but it's called GTP. And it looks like a little explosion, doesn't it? What does that remind you of? It should remind you of this little fella right here. ATP. That's what I'm hoping, that it reminds you of ATP. Let's try this again. Let's try to make it a little bigger so everybody can see it better, hopefully. All right, GTP. I don't know if you remember from AMP1, but when we did DNA, we talked about the subunits of DNA. They were called nucleotides. They were formed from a 5-carbon sugar, a phosphate group, and a nitrogen base. And the 4 nitrogen bases were adenine, guanine, thymine, and cytosine. Remember, A, C, T, and G? You would see those on DNA. Look, A for ATP, G for GTP. So what is this? It's very similar to ATP. That's all I want you to know. It's a really similar molecule to ATP. So that means it's energy, in essence. That's what I'm telling you. GTP is an energy molecule. Right? It'd be great for me to just rip through and tell you exactly what I want you to have. But sometimes I have to take breaks and explain things that are outside of that so you understand it, and then we can come back in. So the hormone binds where? On the surface of the target cell, correct? That changes the shape of what? the receptor. And at the same time, GTP and that receptor change, what they do is they activate the protein molecule that you see right here. It is called a G protein. G protein is activated. Do you see step 2 right here? They say receptor activates G protein. But it does it along with that GTP. Receptor / GTP activates the G protein. Now, what do you see the G protein doing after that? Do you see this? It physically moves along the cell membrane because it's looking for something that it fits into. And what it fits is an enzyme. How do we know this is an enzyme? Because it ends with A-S-E. A-S-E, ACE. The next part of it then would be this. The G protein moves along the plasma membrane, inside or outside the cell. Very important you understand that's on the inside. And it activates the enzyme adenylate cyclase, which is already written for you on the slide, but hey, it doesn't hurt to write things again. G protein activates adenylate cyclase. Adenylate cyclase is a what? An enzyme. What do enzymes do? Say that again. Oh, that's too generic. I mean, you're correct. It does one thing and it does it well. But what is that? You know, this time what it does is it activates adenylate. Well, no, that's what the G protein does. Adenylate cyclase is going to do one thing and do it well, but what does it do? Okay, what do enzymes do generically? But not, you know, what you said. They can. Give me something else. The basic answer is they catalyze chemical reactions or speed up. I hear some of y'all saying that, speeds up. Speeds up chemical reactions. That's what enzymes do. That's still a technical understanding because we always say that. We say, oh, enzymes speed up chemical reactions. Well, fine and dandy. But what most people don't get is this. Chemical reactions can take place without enzymes. But for them to hit together in just the right way to make the reaction happen, left to their own devices, it might take 1,000,000 years for that to actually occur. So when we say that enzymes speed up reactions, they take a reaction that may happen in 1,000 years or 1,000,000 years, and they make it happen how quick? Milliseconds. So when we say speeds it up, we mean that they speed it up enough that it allows us to sustain life, realistically. So that's kind of a big deal. It's a little bigger than just saying, oh, it speeds up reactions. Yeah, I mean, it speeds them up significantly and allows reactions to take place at a pace that is conducive to life. What kind of molecular enzymes typically? Protein. They are protein. It's important that you understand that. I'm going to be reminding you all along in AMP2 what's a carbohydrate, what's a fat, what's a protein. Okay? I think we've got far enough that I can recap to help everybody catch up in their notes. Non-steroid hormone binds the receptor where? Right on the surface. That changes the shape of the receptor along with what other molecule? GTP activates a G protein, which moves where? Along the inside of the plasma membrane and finds what molecule? Adenylate cyclase, and the G protein does what to it? Activates it. The G protein activates adenylate cyclase, and that's where we left off. Okay, adenylate cyclase's one job, I think Jerry said, is to do what? No, that's a generic job. Its one job would be specific. Okay, it takes ATP, it breaks it down. So Robert, you're right, this one does break down. It breaks down ATP and turns it into a molecule called cyclic AMP. That's what it looks like. Camp. It's not camp. It's cyclic AMP. Are hormones messengers, chemical messengers? Well, I would say yeah, right? They go to a target cell and they tell it to do something, so that's a message. So notice up there, by hormone they have first messenger. See, the non-steroid mechanism is sometimes called the second messenger system or second messenger mechanism, and that means that we have to have another messenger. The other messenger is a chemical that is produced in here. See, the hormone never goes in, not the non-steroid. It binds to the receptor and it stays out here. And it activates some machinery in here which produces a chemical. There's the chemical that gets produced. So what is our second messenger for this process? It is cyclic AMP. Cyclic AMP is the second messenger in this instance. There are other ones for other mechanisms. Some non-steroids use other ones. This is the one I like to focus on, though. Cyclic AMP's job is pretty easy. It activates proteins that are called protein kinases. So we just say it activates protein kinases. What does cyclic AMP do? Activates protein kinases. Well, you know how I am. Already you're getting to learn. When I see a new word, I like to explain it because I want you to know the meaning of words. I don't just want you to memorize a word. Anytime in AMP that you see kine, what that really means, K-I-N, means activator. All right? We'll talk about some molecules called kinins later on. They activate something. These molecules are called protein kinases. ASE means enzyme. Kine means activating. And look, it's got the word protein. Isn't that a little redundant? Aren't enzymes proteins anyway? But they chose to call these molecules that are inside the cell protein kinases. If cyclic AMP activates them, that means they must have been what before? Inactive. Yeah. They were in the inactive form. Cyclic AMP activates them. What do protein kinases do? Well, they activate other enzymes. That's their main job. Activate other enzymes. Additionally, they don't just activate other enzymes. They may open up ion channels or cause secretion from the cells, which could actually be secretion of other hormones in some cases. Do you notice that all three things that I said right here happen to be those actions that we mentioned on night one? Do you remember we said how hormones work, and we said that they work by either protein synthesis. What hormones do that? Steroids. Or they do these three things. They activate enzymes that are already there, they open up ion channels, or they stimulate secretion of other chemicals / hormones. So what blanks do we have to fill in here? Well, let me tell you this. One hormone molecule, and what kind of hormone is this? Non-steroid, can actually activate 1 million enzymes in some cases. One drop of hormone can activate 1 million enzymes. How crazy is that? I wouldn't have expected it, frankly. So what does that mean? That means that non-steroids are very powerful. That means that non-steroids amplify. They have an amplified effect. What does amplified mean? The effect is increased. Yeah, simply put, that's what it means. The effect is increased. The other word that they love to use with this is the word cascade. We say the second messenger mechanism or non-steroid hormones when this takes place, there is a cascade. What does cascade conjure up in your mind? Yeah, I knew somebody was going to say that. So what I want you to think is like get the ball rolling and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. You know, one molecule of a hormone may activate 10 G proteins, which could turn on 100 adenylate cyclases and activate 1,000 cyclic AMPs, which could turn on 10,000 protein kinases and activate 100,000 other enzymes. Every time it's amplified from one step to the next to the next. So that's a cascade. And that's your non-steroid mechanism. Notice, it's a lot more detailed than the steroid mechanism. All right? That's probably the part of this chapter that you had the most difficulty reading, I would venture to say. That's a tough part. When you read that on your own, it's really tough. Even if you've read it, you hear me talk about it, and it's still not easy because there's lots of little chemical words. And usually our brains don't love to hear lots of chemical words all put together in one. All right? So shall we roll through the whole thing one time? Make sure we got it. Fill in the blanks anywhere. Non-steroid hormone binds to a receptor on the outside, the surface of the cell. Because the receptor changes shape along with, there's this other molecule inside, GTP, and they do what together? Activate the G protein. This G protein then migrates along the inside of the cell to find what molecule? Adenylate cyclase. And what does it do to it? It activates it. Adenylate cyclase is what kind of molecule? It's an enzyme. And when it's turned on or activated, what does it do? Okay, it converts ATP to cyclic little c AMP. All right. Cyclic AMP is known as a second messenger. And what does it do? Activates protein kinases is correct. I heard that. And what is a kinase? It's an activating enzyme. It is an activating enzyme. So what do protein kinases do? They activate other enzymes. That's their number one job. I heard that. What are two other things that they could do? Right? Open ion channels. Stimulate secretion. Good. And then whatever enzyme we activate or whatever ion channel we open or whatever secretion occurs, that is the action of this hormone. Okay? That doesn't tell us the exact function. That just tells us how it works. So there's some pretty good physiology right off the bat. If you draw this, look, that's plasma membrane. Those are phospholipids. I just want to remind you what all those little guys are. Those are phospholipids. This is the inside of the cell. This is the outside of the cell, right there. Notice that it gives you a whole list of hormones that act via the cyclic AMP mechanism. No big deal. You don't have to memorize all those. But I'll tell you, they're all non-steroids because that's what we're talking about. Some of the non-steroids that aren't on here, it's because they use a different second messenger. It still works this way, but the chemical that's produced in the cell might be something called PIP or calcium calmodulin or something else. Okay? I'm not concerned that you memorize those. Just want you to understand, depending on this enzyme, it could catalyze different reactions, and it could be a different second messenger. But non-steroids typically work by this mechanism, whether the second messenger is cyclic AMP or whether it's something else. Okay? Cool. Now that that difficult job is done, we can move on to something easier, I think. And the something easier is the pituitary gland and its relationship to the hypothalamus. Well, it's pretty easy because after you do something in lab and you see the kind of tissue it is, it makes putting some other information on there a little bit easier. Last night in lab, did we happen to do a hypophyseal portal system? That I can tell by those stairs. That's a no. All right. So we're gonna draw pituitary gland, and we're gonna do it a little bit differently than what you saw last night. so don't get too far ahead of me. The first part will look the same. Something like that. What's up here? Right, hypothalamus. What side's this? Anterior. What side's this? Posterior. So far it's looking the same, correct? What kind of cell is this? Neuron. What's that? Okay, I wouldn't exactly say a synapse. I would... Okay, yeah, an axon terminal or synaptic knob. Cool. It could be a synapse if it went to another neuron. What's that? And what's this? And what's this? What am I trying to show you out there? Yeah, there's capillaries surrounding all this tissue. Can anybody tell me why? Because these chemicals that are going to be produced up here are going to be released from these knobs, correct? And they're going to move into what bodily fluid? The blood. And then where are they going to travel? Everywhere. Now, you guys are getting pretty good at that. Name the two chemicals that move into the blood right here. Nice. ADH and oxytocin. Nice. Name the 6 hormones that we discuss in this class that are produced from right here. Right on. There we go. Collectively as a group, we can do it. Test night is not group night. But right now, group's okay. All right? Group's okay right now. This is growth hormone. We will talk about it. We will talk about prolactin, ACTH, TSH, luteinizing hormone, and follicle-stimulating hormone. Sometimes I'll talk more. Sometimes I'll say, learn it from your sheet. All right? The harder ones I'll discuss. Some of them are real easy. I might put some of that on you to learn on your own. Okay? Next thing we want to do. What kind of cells are out here? Cuboidal epithelial cells. I know these are looking ugly, but that's okay, because cuboidal cells aren't always square, are they? They do usually have nice little round nuclei. Look what I'm going to put out here. What's that? And look what I'm going to put up here. What's that? It's uglier, but it's a capillary. Tell me what you think this is. That would be a little bitty baby short neuron compared to the big one behind. Which pituitary am I drawing in? The anterior. Do you guys know what this area, this narrowing is called? Good, great. In lab, we learned it last night. That's the infundibulum, okay? This is a what, once again? Capillary. That is a capillary. This is what? Capillary. That means they're made for what to occur? There's a lot of ways to say it. I just very commonly say exchange. Stuff can either move in or out. So here's how it works. And I'm actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to change the top one a little bit. I want it to be a little clearer. With its little neuron there. Just so you can see it like this. So here's a neuron. There's its little knob. There's the capillary. Okay? What happens here? is this? Exchange. What does this neuron release right here? Good answer. Hormones, correct? So take a wild guess what this neuron puts in the blood right here. Hormones. Okay? They happen to be called, one group of these hormones that are put in the blood right here are called releasing hormones. So in a roundabout sort of way, I just said, what gland makes hormones called releasing hormones? What gland? The hypothalamus. Correct? That's the hypothalamus right there. Produces a set of hormones called releasing hormones. They travel from this capillary through this little venous network right here down to this. What is this? A capillary. So look, they go from capillary eventually to another capillary. Can you tell what would happen at this capillary? Which way would these hormones move now? Perfect. They would move actually into the what? Into the gland. And what would they do when they're in the gland here? Well, I'm going to say, since they're called releasing hormones, what would they do? They would cause this gland to start dumping its hormones out. Tell me, what's the purpose of the hypothalamic releasing hormones? A little more specific than that. Okay. I would say that the purpose of releasing hormones is to cause the anterior pituitary gland to release its hormones. Absolutely, Matthew, to do that. Oh, sure, adeno, only if I ask for adeno hypothesis, if I say, give me the big long word for this. Otherwise, anterior pituitary is fine all day long. Okay? Actually, most of the time, that's how I want you to think. Just be able to put the big word on when needed. This is the front. This is quite different from the back, is it not? What do you see here? I see a network of blood vessels that begins and ends with what? Capillary here, capillary here. This is considered a little venous plexus. Don't worry about its name or anything like that. But this entire group is called a portal system. Want to take a little guess what a portal system is? Yeah, we're going to say it a little more specific than that, but it is. It's a network of vessels that begins and ends with capillaries. A network of vessels that begins and ends with capillaries. Do you know there's only 3 of these in the whole body? And this is one of them. And this one is called, this will be no surprise. What does that word mean? What does it mean? Yeah, Latin word for pituitary. How many of y'all took Latin in high school? Look. I did. All right. The hypophyseal portal system goes from what to what? Hypothalamus to which pituitary? Anterior only. right? Has nothing to do with the posterior pituitary. Anterior only. This back here, just so you know, there's not just one big neuron, right? There's a whole bunch of them back here. They call this the hypophyseal tract because it's a bundle of neurons. The big picture is you need to know that the hypothalamus controls both the anterior and posterior pituitary, and it does it in two completely distinct and separate ways. The posterior is a continuation of the neurons from the hypothalamus. The anterior is controlled by hormones from the hypothalamus that travel through that little blood vessel network. This would also be a wonderful kind of draw, label, and discuss question for me. Draw, label, and discuss the relationship between the hypothalamus and both pituitary glands. Include the names of all hormones in the pituitary. Yeah, this would be it right here. You might write little extras like, these are produced where? In the hypo, so they are only what here? Yeah, stored, released, secreted, good. Down here. Next part of the story. Releasing hormones do what to the anterior pituitary? Activate it. Cool, I like that. Activate it, right? Turns it on, makes it dump its chemicals out. Do you think there may be some time the hypothalamus needs to shut it down? So what would we call the chemicals that shut down the production here? Close. Inhibiting hormones. The hypothalamus produces both releasing and inhibiting hormones. I don't get real big into the names of these for the most part. I like to make it sound easy, and it really is. So let's just make it easy. Name this hormone. Where is it produced? Anterior pituitary. Good. Growth hormones produced in the anterior pituitary. What controls its release? The hypothalamus. And what from the hypothalamus controls its release? And guess what the name of that would be? Look. Growth hormone. That's a G, not a heart. Growth hormone releasing hormone. Hey, guess what controls the release of prolactin? Prolactin releasing hormone. Guess what controls the release of adrenocorticotropic hormone? ACTH. RH. Do you see how you just put a RH on it and you get the name? So there is a releasing hormone for each of those, kind of, sort of. There's one called gonadotropin releasing hormone that kind of does both of these. But no big deal. I'm not going to ask you that. Okay? There happens to not be an inhibiting for each, but all of these can be inhibited in some mechanism. I'm not going to ask particulars about that. I just wanted you to hear that concept. The big idea is there are releasing and inhibiting hormones that control the release and inhibition or shutdown of the secretion of all anterior pituitary hormones in some way. I would expect you to be able to give me a generic name for each of the releasing hormones, because all you have to do is use the name of the hormone and put what on the end? Releasing hormone RH. That's all you have to do. And that's pretty cool. There. It's crooked, but it'll serve its purpose. Which side's posterior? The little side. Right here. Name a hormone produced by the posterior pituitary. Nice, Judith. There are no hormones produced by the posterior pituitary. Who would have fallen for it tonight if it were test night? It is not test night. Okay? Name 2 hormones secreted from the posterior pituitary. ADH and oxytocin. We're going to talk about anti-diuretic hormone first. If I start on a big long talk about something that we've talked about before, please say, oh, we did this whole thing before in this class, okay? Don't let me take a half an hour for repeat, please. I bet this won't take a half an hour. I'm just guessing. There are some things that make so much sense when you just know a little bit, okay? Understanding and knowing is always better than memorizing. There's things that you have to just flat out memorize, like you have to learn the name anti-diuretic hormone. Okay? Maybe that's memorization for you. But once you learn just the name, there are clues to what it does right in the name. How many people in here have heard of diuretics? Over half the class. How many people know what they do? Uretic, urine, diuretic means pee. Diuresis is to urinate. A diuretic is a chemical that causes you to urinate. Means flushes water out of your body. So what would an anti-diuretic hormone do? The opposite, it would cause you to retain water. And the first time I talk about this hormone, I always say that. I say it causes you to retain water. And then I tell you this. But we're not talking about bloating and puffiness. Our focus is the blood. So we're talking about moving fluid into the blood. So here's what anti-diuretic hormone does. It targets the kidney, and it causes the kidney, instead of making more urine, to make less urine and increase the blood volume, the amount of blood that you have. Any time that you put fluid into the blood and you change nothing else, what do you think happens to the blood pressure? It would go up. And it decreases the production of urine. Because it's not a diuretic, it's an anti-diuretic. Do you see how that's different than memorizing what ADH does? You could memorize that ADH increases blood pressure, or every time you see this, you could go, diuretics push water out, so an anti-diuretic keeps water in. Where does it go? It goes back to the blood. That increases the blood volume, which increases the blood pressure. That will stick with you much, much longer than if you just memorize ADH increases blood pressure. If ADH increases blood pressure, why in the world would it be secreted in the first place? Most hormones are negative feedback. And most hormones use negative feedback to regulate this thing called homeostasis. Right? Be honest with me, because I want to know. Because I had this question this morning, I never thought of it, like this, but I had somebody in AMP2 this morning say, I have never understood what negative feedback really means. Are there people in here that don't get negative feedback? Like right now, if I said, explain negative feedback, you would go, if nobody raises their hand, then I'm going to call on somebody to explain it. Why, thank you very much. All right, here's negative feedback in a nutshell. And guess what we're going to use? Blood pressure. What's a normal blood pressure? A normal blood pressure is somewhere in this box between my hands. Okay? Normal blood pressure is 120 over 80, but 110 over 70 is cool, isn't it? Okay. So let's just say there's a normal, there's a homeostasis of blood pressure somewhere in this normal range. When blood pressure goes up, what does your body like to do? Bring it down. See, when something goes up and your body brings it down, your body's doing the opposite, which is negative. Negative doesn't mean bad. Negative doesn't always mean down. Negative in this instance means the opposite. That's all it means. So what if your blood pressure dropped and wants to make it go up? What does ADH do to blood pressure? It brings it up. So why does it bring it up? Because you must have low blood pressure. ADH is released when you have low blood pressure. Okay? Or if you have too many solutes in there. I don't like to talk about solutes much yet because we haven't done much with that and it gets a little confusing right at the start. I'll throw the whole solute part in later on, so you don't have to worry about it for this test. Now, usually I don't write low blood pressure like that. How do you think I usually write it? Like that. Low blood pressure stimulates the release of ADH from, the PP, the posterior pituitary. Where does it travel? I didn't want to hear the kidneys. Where does it travel? Through the blood, goes everywhere, but its receptors are found primarily in the kidneys. And it tells the kidneys to do what? Slow down on your urinary production and put that fluid where? Back into the blood. And what does that do to blood pressure? Raises it. It raises it. And there's a second thing that ADH does. It's this. I like that. I write a few words, and I get right there, and half the class already knew where I was going. That's cool. Vasoconstriction with a V. Vaso means? Right, blood vessels. Constriction means? Making them smaller in diameter. Sure, shrink, right? Squeezing on them, so to speak, from their own muscle on the inside of them. Meaning in their wall, they squeeze down. Therefore, if you're looking at your lab handout, because I always suggest you have that out when we're doing any hormones. By the way, I updated it last night right after class before I left, and I loaded it up for you with all the asterisks and everything. Okay, so maybe some of you saw that and printed it out. So it's available for you there. The old name of ADH, and sometimes still used, is what? It's in that lab sheet. Vasopressin. Vasopressin. When we're talking hormones, we're talking about homeostasis. We're talking about mechanisms that control and regulate things within the body. In this instance, we're talking about regulating blood pressure. This is a very important blood pressure regulator right here. Do people treat blood pressure with diuretics? Yeah, they do. Sometimes if your blood pressure's too high, if they give you a diuretic, it causes you to pee a lot. Where does your pee come from? Your kidneys pull it right out of your blood. That's where it comes from. So 30 minutes before you urinate, that stuff was in your blood. And then now it's gone out of your body. Wow, that's cool. Okay. Sometimes, though, we have problems. And in the endocrine system, when we have problems or diseases, they're usually due to one of two things. Do you know what that is? Too much or too little of the hormone. Now that's generic. Of course, there could be a tumor on the gland. The gland could be malformed. Something could be pressing on it. There's all reasons that lead to that. But the whole point is whatever's going on either causes too much hormone to be there or not enough hormone to be there. In this case, the main disorder of ADH is due to low levels of ADH. And I'll just tell you, in the current textbook that we're using, diseases are discussed in little sections called homeostatic imbalances. And the way that it works in AMP2 is you guys are responsible for reading in each chapter and understanding the homeostatic imbalances on your own. Sometimes I'll go ahead and talk about them like this one, but many times I won't talk about them. They could still show up on a test. Okay? Some are more important than others. Sometimes I'll talk about them, sometimes I won't. Low ADH, if it's significantly low, it produces a condition called, look at that. Diabetes insipidus. How many people have heard of both those words put together before? Most people have heard of diabetes, type 1 and type 2 diabetes, or diabetes mellitus. This is none of those. This is a different diabetes. Do you know what the word diabetes means? It means to flow through. It means to flow through. What's flowing through in this case? What do you think? Well, let's slow down and let's back up and let's say this. Let's do it this way. ADH causes us to do what? Hold on to water, retain water, right? Where's that water go? Into the blood. So if we don't have enough of it, are we going to be able to hold on to as much? No. So where's that water go? Bye-bye, right? It ends up on a tree or on a bush or, on porcelain somewhere. Okay, it leaves your body. That means low ADH causes this. Increased production and frequency of urination. Polyuria. You know how much polyuria? Can be 20 liters a day. Whoa. How much is 20 liters? Metric converters. 5 gallons. 5 gallons. How many of you guys try to drink a gallon of water a day because you're exercising and healthy? I mean, okay, so, No, that's usually why people try to drink a gallon a day, because they're being healthy and exercising, or maybe they're working outside in the heat. Can you imagine 5 gallons a day? Because what goes out, you got to replace, or you get dehydrated and you might die. Wow. They can't control this. It's not like, oh, I'm peeing on purpose, They have a low level of this hormone. It causes their body to dump water. Hey, what would happen if somebody with this condition were to pass out and not be able to be woken up? If they're peeing out 20 liters, you only have about 5 liters of blood in your whole body. You could die. Yeah, you could go into shock and die with this condition. Now, here's the thing. It's gradual onset usually. So, normal person urinates this much, 1.5 to 2 liters a day. And we'll do that again in the urinary chapter. This is a 10 to 15 fold increase. That's crazy. That's a lot. So don't you imagine if it starts out that you're urinating 3 or 4 liters a day, that it's going to cause you to do something other than go to the bathroom? What's it going to cause? It's going to cause you to get thirsty. Right, you're right, it will dehydrate you, but you'll get thirsty. So that's another symptom of this, is excessive thirst, which is called polydipsia. Dipsia. The cool thing is they can treat it by giving ADH, and it pretty much takes care of the problem. Okay, low ADH causes you to do what a lot? Urinate. So would it be any surprise that alcohol inhibits ADH? That effectively lowers it. Do you know anyone that has one beer and then that opens the floodgate? They go to the bathroom and they kind of keep going there for the next 4 hours you're with them? All right. That's ADH. That's everything you ever wanted to know about ADH. Actually, it's not, because later on in the semester, see, we do hormones in a few different chapters, hormones related to water balance. So we'll come back to this later on. And I'll add even more when it's relevant. Like, what causes the water to move? We'll talk about that kind of stuff. How does it move in and out? And it's really pretty neat stuff. We'll get there. I know you probably got to go, but we're going to do one more hormone before I give you the break. And that's going to be the other hormone that comes from there. Look, that one's kind of laid back. Oxytocin. See, if oxytocin was a person, he'd sign a signature like that. Oxytocin is the positive feedback hormone. Are most things positive feedback in the body? No. Does positive feedback usually regulate homeostasis? No. What feedback regulates homeostasis? Negative feedback. When a value goes out of the normal range, we like to do what? Bring it back. That's always negative feedback. Whether it's down or up, if it pulls it back to normal, that's negative feedback. Positive feedback is different. Let's explain the whole mechanism, and then I'll come back to this. All right, oxytocin, your signature is going to be lost. All right, let's do it like this. There, that's cute. Oh, it'll get cute. That's a baby in a belly, okay? That's what that is right there. See? All right. Oh, he's busting out right there. We can't have that happening, but we'll just leave it for a while. Okay, so Mom has one of these, too, somewhere up there. I know it's looking like some crazy football helmet, but what's it really supposed to be? Or a turtle. I don't know. So we'll put all these little curves and convolutions up there. What's that supposed to be? That's your brain. Okay? There's your brain. We're going to put a big, huge pituitary gland right there. Okay. That's a pituitary tumor, so this person would be 112 feet tall. But, you know, that's okay. So here's the whole point of this matter. Oxytocin. What happens to this object when the baby gets big about 9 months or so into this process? We have some stretching here. Do you think? Ladies, when that happens to you, do you feel the stretch? No? Do you think your brain is aware of the stretch, though? See, some women feel it, some women don't feel it. That's the thing. Some women don't feel much, some women do feel a lot. Your brain knows it either way. So look here. When you have stretch, look, there's input to the brain. Take a wild guess what stretch on the cervix, that's part of the uterus, causes to happen. oxytocin release. Where's oxytocin travel? Through the blood. And it goes everywhere. Does that include the uterus? Uterus. Of course, it does include the uterus. What do you think oxytocin does to the uterus? Stimulates contraction. And those contractions do what to little Bigfoot baby? They push it down here, which does what to the cervix? Look here. Increases the stretch. Hey, positive feedback. Our initial stimulus was the stretching. We do something that eventually brings us back to more stretching. See, it takes it in the same direction. And then we get more input to the brain, more oxytocin released, and more contractions. Because it's not one big contraction that pushes the baby out, is it? Anybody? One contraction and your baby popped out? I had a girl today that said, well, I only had to push like 5 times and it was out. Who had the longest labor in here? Was he a problem child at that age? 30 minutes. Anybody can beat 30 minutes? 13 hours? Anybody beat 13 hours? 26. Anybody beat 26?
I was a 10-pound baby.
You were a 10-pound baby.
So I don't know how my
Wow. Wow.
I'm sorry when I got over it.
I bet you did. Because you caused a lot of this. Which caused a lot of this, which caused a lot of those. That's how it works. That's what kind of feedback, y'all? That's easy to remember, right? Oxytocin is a positive feedback chemical. Now, here's the cool thing. How long does it continue? As long as the stimulus is there. The stimulus is the stretching. So, right after the baby pops out, the uterus hasn't gone back, so it keeps contracting for a little while, right? That helps to get the placenta out. Okay? And then periodically it continues to contract to try to go back to normal. Hey, you might know something from the lab sheet. What else does oxytocin target? The mammary glands. And what does it cause? I prefer this term. I know it probably says that. The ejection of milk. If you've never seen breastfeeding, sometimes when the baby pops off, you get a stream of milk that shoots a few feet. Raise your hands if you've seen this. Look at those hands, y'all. Holy moly. Milk can move. And the reason that happens is because there's muscles in the mammary glands. And here's where I was going with this. Oxytocin is a hormone that causes milk ejection or contraction of the mammary glands. When you breastfeed your baby, does oxytocin only go to your breast? You mean it goes everywhere? Even your big toes? Yeah. Does it go to the uterus? So what's the uterus do? Contract, and that helps the uterus to go back to its normal size quicker. So breastfeeding is very good for mom, as well as the baby. Hey, the first day, what's the fluid called? It's called colostrum, and what's in that? Antibodies. Goods. It's the baby's immune system for the first couple of months that they're alive, are those antibodies. They got some that cross the placenta, and then they get some from breastfeeding. That's cool. No, orgasm does too, since you asked. Yeah. And it's in, some of y'all know that already. They said, well, you want to have your baby? Here's a way that you can have your baby. Actually, also acupuncture can help you to go into labor. I had a friend, I studied acupuncture for a year. I had a friend that her baby was overdue, and finally she called me up and asked me to come over, and I didn't use needles on her. I just did pressure points, and there's certain, you should never have acupuncture if you're pregnant until you're ready to have the baby, because there's certain points that just cause the baby to come. And within 8 hours, she was at the hospital getting ready to have the baby. It was pretty cool. That's oxytocin. Break time.